Oh, all right, guys, how are we? It is freezing for me here. I know a couple of you guys have said you're from Canada and you're in minus 37. A couple of you from Edmonton. I've got friends that are from there, so I'm familiar with just how cold it is down there. So why you live there, I have no idea, because to me that would be absolutely terrible. So as you can probably hear in the background, Greek people like to talk on the phone at a ridiculous level, so they involve the entire community in their conversation. Reminds me of when I was going from Patras to Italy on the ferry, and anyway, we would it's an overnight trip, so you spend a lot of the time in the main sort of foyer up the top, and yeah. So anyway, there was this guy there who decided that everybody on that ship wanted to listen to his conversation, and he was screaming into the phone and thought he was the most wonderful guy. And it went on for hours. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, you get used to it over here. Yeah. So anyway, why you would want to live in Edmonton, I have no idea, and that goes for you, Steve. Anyway, so yeah, it's cold here. Cold for me, and I think the thing is, when you're in a place like Edmonton, all the infrastructure, everything's set up to deal with that level of cold. And when you're in a place like this, or you're in Australia, it's not really that cold most of the time, so you might only have a month or two of cold weather, so there's no need to build that sort of infrastructure in. But I can guarantee you the heaters are going 24/7 at our place. So things are once again changing over here. So 2 days ago, the government made another change of policy, and basically said that if you wanted to come to Greece, you didn't need to have vaccination status and PCR tests, negative PCR tests. You can now have a antigen test that's been taken within 24 hours of arriving, and it's kind of what we expected, to be honest, because they're pretty dependent on tourism here, and once you put obstacles in people's way, they're just not going to turn up. And if you make things difficult for me to go somewhere, I just won't go. I'm not going to spend my money in your place. So yeah, that's where things are at the moment. So they've certainly backed down. It took them 2 days to back down from that, and it's, as I said, it's what we expected the Greek government to do, and I think there's going to be a lot more back downs. In regards to the economy here, things are starting to fall apart, and as much as you won't hear that too often in sort of the mainstream media, key indicators for that are basically now in Greece, the government is having to subsidise energy costs because they are rocketing through the roof. And you're seeing inflation in the US as well. Energy costs in Europe have skyrocketed. And I've noticed inflation in just everyday services and goods. Give you an example, like just a Colgate toothpaste, right? It used to cost €2.20, and it now costs $3.30, I think. So you can see about a 30% increase in that product. So just ridiculous. So you're getting that inflation right across the board here, and things are only going to get worse. And that's purely because governments are having to print more and more cash, as much as they're not wanting to admit that. A lot of them are doing it. So if they're not doing that, they're borrowing money, which is going to put things up as well. Did receive a few comments regarding my appraisal of Brazil, and certainly nothing in great depth with that. And a couple of people said, well, why would you use GDP per capita when labour costs there are so much lower than in other places around the world? Well, the reason why is because you've got to have some measure, right? And it's easier to use GDP per capita than something else that's completely arbitrary. So when you're building roads and bridges and the sort, yeah, your labour cost might be less, but your cost for concrete, metal or steel and other bits and pieces, they're still the same. So that's universal. Your cost of your commodities is going to be a universal price. It's got nothing to do with what you can get away with from your labour market. In actual fact, it's a bit worse if you've got a depreciated currency. So yeah, so that's why we use GDP per capita, and it's just a rough measure. It's not going to give you anything precise, but it's a good indicator. I think Brazil, for example, their GDP per capita is about $6,000 US, whereas Australia is about 58,000. So you can imagine if a government is collecting taxes on that, and they're going to have a lot more money to spend. So somebody else said, look, you can't really compare those sort of economies together because they're two different economies, and I get that. I understand that. But what I'm trying to do is give people a bit of an insight into how things work. And there's a lot of people that sort of say, oh, look, I'll just go to Mexico. You get there, and then all of a sudden you think Mexico is really not what I was after, not what I was expecting, and disappointment sets in. And I get that. I'm just trying to point that out to people and use some sort of economic measure to help people say, right, if the GDP is that low, GDP per capita is that low compared to other developed economies, your infrastructure is not going to be the same. So in saying that too, Brazil is a huge place and very diverse, completely different places around, from the beach to the rainforest, whatever. So yeah, so just keep that in mind. And as I said, GDP per capita is just a measure, and it just gives you a bit of an indicator of what you can expect when you go to a place in regards to infrastructure. Somebody said South America, absolutely never going to happen. I get that too, because I've sort of held that belief for a long while. Purely because when you consider crime and other indicators like that, organised crime, corruption, South America is it's got a lot. Look, a lot of places do. So I just think that places like Australia hides it a lot better than other places. So yeah, I think there's a lot of government corruption, particularly in Australia. But anyway, we won't go there, will we? But yeah, when you're talking GDP per capita, that's what I'm looking at. I'm just looking at different figures to try and give an indicator of what you can expect. And So yeah. Somebody else said, look, one thing is to physically relocate and move. What other strategies do you have in regards to relocating? Look, as I said to you before, banking's really important. I use Wise, and I'll leave a link to Wise in the description of this video. You can click on that. Just choose the link to the currency that's going to be your home or domicile at the moment, because you'll have to use your proof. So if you're using US dollars, then you'd click the US. If you're using Australian, then you'd click the Australian. I know Wise is now available, I think, in Brazil, so yeah, you could use that. So anyway, just click on the currency that's applicable for you, but it's so handy. Like, so we have some earnings in Australia, and so I earn in Australian dollars. And so anyway, the other day I just transferred some money over and to pay for some bills over here, and because it's in the Australian dollars, geez, how's that? Yeah, because it's in Australian dollars, I can just transfer directly into that currency in Wise, and then spend it in on my Wise card in euros, because my bills are in euros. So just keep that in mind. That's why it's pretty handy. And I think all up in fees, it cost me about 20 cents. So that's pretty good. Yeah, so the other thing that you want to do is look at your how you set up your financial infrastructure. So one of the things that you'll find a lot of people do, particularly with that sort of stuff, is they will basically set up a trust fund. Probably better if I give you an example. So I know of one guy who has an online business. He's a YouTuber, and probably a lot of people would know him, particularly if you like this channel, because he's got a similar channel. Now, when you look at his channel, he's registered as being in Hong Kong, but you know that he doesn't live there. What people do is they go to Hong Kong or places like that. So there's some places around the world called payment gateways. And I'm not talking about payment gateways as in online, but these economies don't really have a lot of natural resources. So what they've strategized to do is to be a bit of a gateway between East and West and other currencies and financial institutions. Hong Kong is one of those, Singapore is another. I think Dubai has set itself up as another one of those at the moment. So, so they're the places with the best sort of, some of the best, what would you call it, financial services. So what these guys do is they go there, they set up a company, and before that they probably set up a trust fund, I would imagine, and that trust fund will then set up a company, and it'll probably be a trading company. Now, a trading company is different to your holding company. Holding company will hold assets, and so say you want to buy a house, you'll set up your trust fund, and then that trust fund will then operate and own or control a house or a car or a motorbike, and each one of those assets will be under a different holding company. Your trading companies basically have access to being its own entity. So that means that you don't have to directly be involved in that entity. And so what a lot of these guys do is they use their accountants or lawyers to be directors, shareholders, secretaries, etc. on these trading companies. And then the major beneficiary will be the trust fund. So, and then you will basically be the one of the beneficiaries of the trust, right? So that's how they set it up. So this is definitely not financial advice. I'm not advising you at all on what to do. I'm just saying this is what a lot of people do. If you have a look at where some of these YouTubers have set up their domicile to be registered with Google or YouTube, it'll be in places like Hong Kong. So that's one of the things that people do, because when you earn money offshore with a Hong Kong bank account or a trading company, it's basically tax-free. So all money that comes in from offshore is tax-free. And what you'll see is that a lot of these guys are earning money in US dollars or in euros, collecting that money in Hong Kong, and then once they've collected that money, they don't have to pay tax on that, because the money's come in from offshore. It's completely legal. And if they were to say earn money within the territory of Hong Kong, they would pay a flat corporate rate of around 15%. So anyway, that's basically how these people set things up. And the reason why people set up, I can't win with all this noise at the moment, but when you consider that people put these assets into holding companies and that sort of stuff, they do that to reduce their exposure to liability. So in Australia, they call it a PTY LTD, so proprietary. So that means that there's ownership of whatever assets, whether it be intellectual property or physical assets, and limited, so it's limited liability. I think in America it's called an LLC, limited liability company. So I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, I'm not really familiar with America's taxation system, but I do know that there are agreements between taxation domiciles, and so for example, if I was to earn money in US dollars, I pay maybe 30% tax in the US, then I'm going to be required to pay the remainder of my tax liability in Australia. I mean, you have to basically work that out with your accountant in Australia and an accountant maybe in the US. There are other options, particularly with Estonia. They have their Eresidency program, and that will allow you to manage your corporations and taxes and open bank accounts and do all the other processes that you need to do through Estonia online. And that'll cost you about $150, maybe $180 to set up for 4 or 5 years. And you've got to have 2,000 euros in your bank account to start up, and that's got to be spent on the business. So yeah, so there's lots of options in regards to setting things up. So you need to just have a look at what's available, and then maybe sort of venture and do some more research. But I know, having looked at a couple of guys who are like travel experts or relocation experts, you have a look at their YouTube channel on, say, Social Blade, you'll see that their station, or their channel, sorry, is registered in Hong Kong. and that'll be why it's registered in Hong Kong, because yeah. One thing to also note, that Greeks pay no attention to road rules. They genuinely don't care, even pedestrian crossings. Yeah, so that's why they do that, because it basically reduces their tax liability to naught, and they can basically hide who owns the company. As I said, there's some pretty fancy financial services overseas, and very sophisticated, and that's what these guys do. I don't do that, but the year of living dangerously, right? So anyway, I just thought I would give you a bit of an insight into that, and a few people asked about it, and so yeah, that's how it works. Anyway guys, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the channel Overseas Exiles, yeah, do so. Hit the like button, subscribe,